Hello and welcome to this little tutorial that I'm making here. This tutorial is going to be about how to connect to Office 360 mailboxes via the Microsoft Graph API utilizing Python in a daemon scenario. So basically, connecting to multiple mailboxes utilizing an application level secret. So you might be asking yourself, why do I care and why would I want to make these changes? So there are actually a couple of really good reasons. First one being that basic authentication started being phased out as of October, and that can be extended till January 2023, but with a permanent deprecation that same date. The other really good reason is if you're using Exchange Web Services to connect to email mailboxes, they didn't say it outright, and I don't think they will delete the mail functionality from AWS anytime soon due to the large amount of existing legacy systems. But as you can see from this post from last year, they definitely have the intention of migrating everything to Graph and start thinning out support for these legacy APIs. And also, it goes without saying that if you would want to make the most secure applications possible, uh, you should follow the best practices. And if you must make changes, why not make them the way Microsoft clearly wants us to make them? Now, with that little rant out of the way, let's get into the practical stuff. Let's start off by looking at the repo I have prepped up here for this tutorial. As you can see, here we have a written guide with the steps to follow. Feel free to use it if you prefer that explanation medium. For the ones that are still here, let's keep on going. The first thing you'll want to define is what type of application am I making. With that in mind, I recommend you have a look through the MSAL scenarios and select the scenario that best suits your use case. In my case, I want to make an application daemon that will run as a service in my company's servers. Hence, I'll be selecting the daemon desktop app scenario. I would recommend you simply download this example and use the parts that are useful to you. In my case, I only needed to use the authentication section. If your scenario is the same as mine, you can simply reuse the code in the repo. The next step is going to be logging into the Azure portal as an administrator and going to the app registration section. Once that is done, we will register a new application. Now we will want to give our application a meaningful name, so test. Here you can select the type of access that the API is going to give. For our example, we'll just keep it simple. I'll keep it under single tenant. And now we have to select the type of redirect URL. That's depending on the type of application scenario that you picked. For our use case, we'll want to select the public client native. Now we'll register the application. And this window will open with relevant information. We will need to write down the application ID and the tenant ID. Those two are going to be needed for the connection with the Graph API. Now we want to create an application secret. So we click here, add secret, and create a new secret. We give it a name. Right. We add it. And our new secret has been created. Keep in mind that the value is only going to be available for a short while. Once this page is refreshed, this value will no longer be available. So we copy it and we keep it somewhat safe. Now that we have created the secret, the last step would be to add permissions. So click here. And we see that we already have a default permission. For my use case, we do not want that default permission, so I'll be deleting that default permission. Remove the permission. Yes. Okay. So now, how do we decide what type of permission we want to have? So I recommend you go here, come to the Microsoft API guide, and you select the type of use case that you want to have. Okay, so for instance here, we have the send mail. So for applications, we would need the send mail permission. Something else that we will need is the create draft message. So we go here, and we see that we need the mail read write. So those are the two permissions that I'll be adding, since I want to be able to send mails and create them. So I go over here, I click on add permissions, I click on Graph API. I click on application permissions, and then I type mail. That searches the mail for us. So what we want to have is the mail read write, the mail send. We add these permissions. And now, as you can see here, these permissions need the admin consent to properly work. So we will give these applications admin consent. Admin consent has been granted. So right now the application is ready, but it can access all mailboxes. That can be an issue, and that can be limited using an application policy that we will be updating. So how do we go about updating this application policy? You might think that it should be as easy as simply adding the mailboxes here from the Azure portal, but sadly, due to the legacy nature of the Microsoft environment, all that has to do with mailboxes needs to be administered from the Exchange Admin Center. So that's where we're going now. We're going to open the Exchange Admin Center. And now we're going to go to groups. Open up groups. And then we add a new group. Now we have to select the mail enabled security group. We give the group a name. Okay, we don't care about the description. Now we assign an owner. This is the person that's going to be able to add members to the group, so it needs to be an administrator profile if you want. We'll add myself. Okay. Next. Now we will add members to this group. Here. We'll add the no reply. So now we have our owner and a member. The application will only be able to access the member. Now we give the mail group a name. Okay. Choose a domain. Okay, now that we have a domain, these two options here can be clicked if you think they are useful. I'll click this one, since we do not want people to join without the owner's approval. Now we review that everything's the way we like it. Alright, so we create it. And we close it. That is done. Now that both our application and our security group have been created, now we will want to link both. And we will do that by utilizing the Exchange CLI. So the first thing you will want to do is log in to the Exchange online utilizing your administrator account. So this is the command to do so. We'll run the command. And now we introduce the password. All right. Sign in. That is done here. We see the message. So now that we have successfully logged in our Exchange Online CLI, we need to talk a bit about the types of application policies that we could add. So there are basically two types. We could deny access. What that means is the mails within our security group will not be able to be accessed by the application, but every other mailbox will. And the other type of application restriction that we could set is the application restrict write. So what that does is it restricts the access to only the mailboxes within the security group. That is the approach that we're going to be following. So I'll just be launching the command right here. And as you can see, the application has been applied. Now we will run a couple tests. Right, let's test out the application policy. Here I have introduced a mailbox that the application should not have access to, and I also have introduced the application ID. So let's run this command. As we can see, the application has been denied access to the specific mailbox. Now let's try a different mailbox that it should have access to. As you can see, it has been granted for this specific mailbox. So that concludes our testing. So that concludes the setup for the Azure portal as well as for the Exchange security group. And now what we will need to do is clone the repo and actually use the library to send mails utilizing the Graph API. So this is a cloned repo here. I'll open up the repo with Visual Studio Code. All right, open up a new terminal here, and I'll create a new virtual environment. All right, let's create a new virtual environment. Right. We have created the new virtual environment. Let it finish here. All right, done. Now we're gonna switch to that interpreter. Opening up a new terminal here. All right, and we already have our virtual environment. You can select the interpreter utilizing these. If that pop-up didn't show up, you could do it other ways too. That's the virtual environment created. Now we want to install the requirements. So sorry, -r, we need that. Yep. Now it should work for us. Alright, now that everything's installed, we can see that our tests have already been set up, and what we need is to create the resources needed for the application to run correctly. First of all, this is a specific thing that I did here so that the application secret is kept in a secure place instead of hard-coded in the test. What we're going to do is we're going to create a Windows credential, and then we're going to reference that credential in the application setup. So let me create a Windows credential here. We have it here, credential manager, Windows credential. We add a generic credential, right? We'll give it a name. Test. We need to remember this name somewhere. All right, now we need to add the secret. And we'll just add something for the username. It doesn't really matter because we're not using it, but we're gonna add something. All right, our credential has been created. Now we need to fill up these sections. I'll do it and then I'll come back. Rapidly before I set up the test, I wanted to mention how to utilize the test and the different parts that we have access to. Here, this is self-explanatory. These are the resources that we created when creating the application. This is the resource that we created in the Windows Vault. And utilizing the send mail, for instance, requires you to give the locations of the files in an array, the files that you want to send. Then you have the subject, which is a simple string, and then you have the body, which is an HTML string. And then you have the sender, which that would be the mailbox of the sender. Then you have the recipients. Those are the recipients of the possible message. It's an array, so you could add multiple. Then you have the BCC recipients, which is optional, so you could delete it. That's what we're going to do now. And optionally, you also have another parameter. If I can get it to open. Let's see. Also another. Alright. Okay. So you also have the parameters of importance. Both BCC recipients and importance are optional. What that means is you could add them or not, it doesn't matter. Importance has a value of high, normal, and low, if I remember correctly. And you have to pass it in as a string. Well, just a little reminder of how to use the API and whatnot. Well, how to use the library I made. We're going to go more in depth when explaining the different parts of the library. Just a little hint before running the tests. Now I have introduced the secrets and the tenant IDs and all of that. I've also introduced the mailbox that I want to send to and the mailbox that I'm sending from. And I'll be running the specific test. So we'll click here. Test is running and we get a pass. So the test has run successfully. Now we go and we check our mailbox and here we have the message that has been sent to the mailbox here utilizing the Graph API. Right, check it out here, the two messages, and yeah. So let's have a look at the different parts of the library. So let's start off with the authentication module. Here we have several URLs that we use internally to request the token as well as to connect to the different endpoints. Here you have the section in which you get the credential from the credential manager. You could change these if you want to hardcode your credential, if you want to do something else with it. It just basically needs to be set to these parameter. You could change the library as you please. Also, I would like to mention that several things would need to change if you were to do this for a different scenario. Like for instance, what we're looking here, we looked at some different scenarios. So for instance, if we were to use delegated permissions, we would need to change the URL as well as the scope. The scope for delegated permissions is actually an array of the permissions that you need to acquire. Yeah, if you would want to do another type of authentication, I'd recommend you create another class with that type of authentication, but I'll leave that up to you. You can do whatever you want with this code. Feel free to use it as you please. Another thing that I didn't do here that's interesting and you could apply is the token caching. I didn't do it since the application that I require doesn't actually connect more than once per 2 hours or once per day. So token caching would be unnecessary because maximum time a token can be cached is 1 hour if I remember correctly. So it would need to reacquire the token every time anyways. So maybe that's something you want to do for security reasons and for efficiency reasons. That's something that's not implemented, but if you want another video showing how to cache the tokens, I'd be more than happy to make it. So you could leave the requirements of, you could leave the things that you're interested in the comments, and I'll have a look and see if I can make another video about it. Okay, so let's move on to the actual section that connects to the Graph API and what everything does and whatnot. Oh yes, sorry, forgot to mention here. We'll open it. Alright. So another thing that should be mentioned is that the only part in which I use the MS AL library is actually the token acquisition section here. All of the other are just simple requests to the REST API of Graph, utilizing the requests module from Python. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of cases that I've implemented here and how I approached implementing these requests to the Graph API. Let's start off by talking about the send mail, which is quite a simple one. So we just go here, we check out the send mail. Alright, we have it here, and we check out the type of URL that we have to send that we have to access. Here we see that we need to send a post, users / blah, and we have to add a principal name. That is basically the user ID that we want to use. So you could use the user ID. A principal username is just an email address. You could use an email address, and then you have to add the send. So that's what we are parsing here. Yeah. We're just parsing the value that we added in the header. So that would be the sender here, and then we pass the Graph API object, which is where we get the token from here. Result, we get the access token, and that's sent here in the header. The body, we just format the body according to the request here. I just basically copied these and modified it to my needs. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Nothing too complex, pretty easy to use. You want to also handle the exception error codes. Maybe you want to log them, or you want to do something with them. You just simply log them for error tracking reasons and whatnot. So let me explain one of the most complex cases you can actually do with the Graph API, and that would be to send a file, a mail file, with large attachments. There are two ways of sending attachments utilizing the Graph API. The simpler way would be, if the attachment is not very large, you can encode the attachment file in base64 and attach it to the JSON petition straight. But if that file is larger than 1 megabyte or something like that, it's not going to work. So how do we do it then? How do we go about sending large files? Let's have a look here at the different parts that are needed to send a large file. First, we'll look at creating a draft message. The first thing we need to do here is actually create this draft message. That will give us a message ID that we can use to create an upload session. So I just basically went here, looked at how to create a draft message. I created my draft message here, similarly as the send message. And then we took the response JSON ID, which is actually the message ID, the draft message ID, that we need to reference when creating the upload session. Then we create an upload session for each of the files that we want to upload. And we declare the attachment name and the file size. Once that is done, we split up the file into the recommended size chunks. That is the recommended size by Microsoft. And then we upload the files to the created upload URLs in the specified chunks. Once all of that is done, we send the message utilizing the send endpoint. So that's one of the most complex cases, and you can see that it's actually pretty simple. It just has a couple of parts, but it's just about reading the documentation and making the requests according to the specifications that they have. Once the token acquisition is done and you're logged in, it's just as simple as using a REST API. Pretty quick thing I forgot to mention is that if you install the package, you can use it as a standalone library. What do I mean by that? There is a package within the repo inside the package folder that you can install, just doing something like that, like what I'm going to show right now. So we go cd packages, right, and then we look. And now you can see that we have the package, and we will be able to import the libraries to use in whatever we need. This is a little demonstration client. Here you can see how to connect. Just introduce your credentials, and the flow will run exactly the same as if you were using it from the tests. And since this virtual environment is not loading for some reason, we'll just change and show you that effectively it is recognized by the other virtual environment. Alright, hopefully that was helpful. So hopefully all of that was of use to you. If you would like me to go more in depth in any of the areas covered, please leave a comment, and I'll read it, and we'll go in depth in that specific area that you would want me to cover. Also, if there is some other subject that you would want me to cover regarding computer science and whatnot, please let me know in the comments also. Appreciate it, and thanks for watching this tutorial.